Okay, everyone, we're going to get started now. Once again, thanks for joining us today for our webinar on exploring funding opportunities for First Nations energy-efficient housing. My name is Jim Vanderwall with the Fraser Basin Council, and together with my colleague Elena Chia, we welcome you here today. This webinar is part of our series on First Nations Home Energy Save. And this is the second webinar in our series. We're pleased to have a couple of great speakers today to tell us about some programs. So the goals of the First Nations Home Energy Save program are really to help communities reduce energy use and costs, of course, through sharing success stories, building local capacity, and also supporting local economic development. But of course, behind all of that, funding and financing is a critical component. And so today we've got some speakers from the provincial and federal government to talk about some of their programs. I just wanted to mention, as I mentioned earlier, that if you have any difficulties with the webinar, you can use the question box or chat to interact with us or ask questions. There's also an email, fraserbasin@gmail.com. If you have any difficulties, you can get a hold of us that way as well. And so the way that the webinar will work is that we will, after you hear from our presenters, you have the opportunity to interact and ask questions. And so you can use the question box feature and type in your question, or if you'd like to ask a question over the phone or with audio, just let us know that as well using the question feature, and we'll unmute you to do that. Right now, everyone's lines are muted just because it makes it easier for everyone to hear the presenters. I guess I've already covered this. So we'll move right to towards our speakers. So we have two speakers today. The first speaker is Rick Sabiston, who's with Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada in their capital program, and Lindsay Wood with the Ministry of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, who's a senior project advisor and responsible for the First Nations Clean Energy Business Fund. I also wanted to thank our sponsors for this session before we move to our speakers. Those include the Real Estate Foundation of BC, BC Hydro, and the province of BC, as well as Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. So before we go into the speakers, we just want to find out a little bit about who's participating today. And so we're going to launch a poll, and we'd appreciate you to let us know who you are and what type of organization you work with. Great. Well, thanks very much. So you can see that we've got great participation from nations, from both administration and council, also lots of consultants, and as well as some local governments and others, non-government organizations. So thanks, everyone. That's very helpful to know who's on the line. So without, I guess, further ado, we'll switch things over to Rick's presentation as soon as we get this sorted here, to talk about some of the federal government programs available to support housing and energy efficiency. So take it away, Rick.
Great, thanks, Jim. And thanks, Fraser Basin Council and Jim and Elena for providing this opportunity. I was looking at your last page there. Lindsay, you and I are both down as seniors, so I don't know what we're supposed to do with that, but hopefully nobody takes it too seriously. I just wanted to take this opportunity to go over what we have for funding opportunities through, we'll call it INAC now with our new acronym. and how it can, especially in regards to the energy efficiency topic that we're here for today. But I think overall it's really broad brush housing as well. So I'm going to provide just a quick outline of overview of the NAS concept. That's the new approach for housing support concept. Activities and criteria for each of the three streams, and then just walk through some simple scenarios that might help with getting a better understanding of how these streams can support First Nation. And we might just touch on the application template and a little bit on the process. I think questions will come after both presentations.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And I'm not a Mac person, so Jim is guiding me along
Just
here.
Use the arrows here.
Okay.
Use the arrows.
Okay. So for the overview of the NAS, what we initially did, I must say we've got two housing subsidy programs right now. One, many of you are familiar with the existing housing subsidy program that we have, and it's going to range anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 per house. And for renovations, such as energy retrofits, the First Nation is eligible for half of that subsidy, so it would be $10,000 to $20,000. That subsidy is based on $20,000 would be for an urban First Nation, $40,000 would be a remote location First Nation. So we looked at that funding. That existing housing subsidies program still goes. It's still moving along, but in the meantime, we're looking at reprofiling the housing so it better supports First Nations with their overall objectives for housing. And over the past couple of years, this has evolved into what we're calling the new approach for housing support. And its overall objective is to support First Nations to develop and implement their housing strategies so it really reflects their community needs. And we look at those critical components that we need to support in order to better align our funding with what First Nations needs are. And it starts with governance. So, and we might get into a little bit more about that. Council commitment and any administrative structures council may need to set up. Capacity for administrative purposes, their staff, and engagement with the community, which engagement could also be with other government agencies, other funders, other partners, and overall affordability. So when we're looking at energy efficiency, is it going to be affordable? And rather than putting the band into a financial burden. So overall, those four things we need for successful housing.
Rick, I'm just going to make a little adjustment here to see if we can get this to work properly. Okay. How does it look on yours? Okay, thanks. Carry on.
And so the overall, the NAS concept, then we've got those four components that are kind of the foundation for supporting First Nations and what's needed for successful housing. And then we have the three streams that are designed to support First Nations with attaining the levels of capacity and governance structures they need to move forward with their housing plans. So all of that backdrop, we've got the three streams, and I'll just go over which. Now I have to ask Jim. I'm looking at two screens here.
This is fine. This is what they're seeing.
Okay.
Do you want me to close this for you? Here, just hold on a second.
So,
minor
perfect.
technical difficulties here. Is that better?
Perfect. So I'm not sure if everybody can see that very well on their screens, but we'll get into further details. But overall, it's three streams, and they're designed to complement each other, especially Stream 1 and Stream 2, where Stream 1 is that foundational piece of setting the stage or setting the table, then to move forward with the actual bricks and mortar construction renovations on a multi-year basis under Stream 2. So Stream 1 is for developing the policies. In this case, we're looking at energy policies, but they can also be part of your housing policy. You may have particular strategies or feasibility assessments that you want to do, community engagement, ensuring that leadership commitment is there to develop and implement those policies. And there may be training or capacity development initiatives that BAND wants to undertake as well. So the funding for this is $50,000 per First Nation. It's intended to be a one-shot deal, and the First Nation must contribute at least 20% to the cost of the project. And you'll see that some of that 50%, half of that can be in kind. And we did that because some bands just may not have the actual cash to put towards a project. In the brackets underneath every one of these streams, you see case-by-case situations may also be considered. We want to be flexible to accommodate the needs for the First Nation. And as an example, we've had some bands who have got together under a tribal council and wanted to do like a joint project with a number of First Nations. So we then have to look at that project on its own to see, number one, they may be asking for more than $50,000, obviously, if it's for a number of bands, but also that the bands are also coming up with their own equity. So this is that critical part to having that policy, energy policies, housing, roles and responsibilities. Some of the questions that the band may want to ask themselves are, where's a community housing, what's it going to look like 2, 5, or 10 years down the road? So this is the part where you can do the visioning. I know we've had, I think of the presentations we had from Kodacha and Kitasu. And there was a lot of community engagement and visioning and setting goals for where they wanted to go. And this Stream 1 can help support the band with that endeavor. Just as a simple example, a Stream 1 may take 1 year, it may take 3 years. But if we just did assume this scenario where a band wanted to undertake community engagement, do some technical energy standards, look at rental ownership agreements, things like that, and develop a plan. You may need to do home assessments or quotes. This stream can support the First Nations doing that. And if we looked at it, if total cost of all those activities came to $40,000, then through the Stream 1, the NAWS funding, INAC could support $32,000, up to a maximum of $50,000 is what INAC's maximum contribution is. And the First Nation would have to come up with 20%, which is, in this case, would be $8,000. Now, the band can put in $4,000 of in-kind and $4,000 cash, if that's what it needed to do. Stream 2 is the big diversion from our existing subsidy program. Those of you who are familiar with our existing subsidy program, we have to completely change our perspective on how we're looking at this Stream 2. It's intended to provide a multi-year commitment for funding based on the plan that the First Nation has developed. So if we look back and say, well, for instance, if the band undertook activities under Stream 1 to develop a plan, council was behind it, there was community engagement, so you know where you want to go over the next 1 to 3 years, then we could look at that and make a multi-year commitment for AANDC funding, INAC funding, towards your plan. So how the funding works on this is based on what the band's existing housing subsidy is. We say we'll commit upfront to 10 subsidies over the 3 years. So in this case, I'll just go to the next slide here for the scenario. If we had an applicant whose existing housing subsidy program was $27,000, we say under NAWS it's a minimum of $300,000. So you'd actually be eligible for $300,000, not $270,000 over the 3 years. If the band chose to just have a 2-year plan, then it's just prorated. It would, in this case, it'd be prorated to $200,000. I just want to go back to this other slide. Some of the things that you need to consider in order to be ready for Stream 2. Policies are current and implemented. Council's committed. Arrears are either minimal or effectively being addressed. What we heard from many First Nations when we were developing this criteria is that a multi-year commitment could put a First Nation further into arrears if these other things aren't put in place. And the plan, you could include renovations. So in this case, you could include the energy renovations. You could do new builds. You could do lot preparation, project management. The key is that the plan is financially viable. And if we have time, we can quickly just go to the application where we ask for the financial viability test. So to run through the scenario, here's how it would look like in your plan. You know that there's potentially $300,000 there from INAC. And let's say that you want to do 10 renovations. You get quotes to do 10 renovations, and all 10 together a total $100,000. So it's key to look at that. No, we're no longer looking at the revenue or the subsidy per door, but for the total project, it costs $100,000. To build 2 new homes, it costs $400,000. Let's say you need to do 4 mold renovations. Total of those 4 renovations is quoted at $100,000. You might need to prep a lot, like demolish a dilapidated home that's on the lot and grade the lot, prepare it. Maybe that's going to cost you $15,000. And you want to have some project management over the course of the project over the 3 years, and that's going to cost you $50,000. So in total, that would be a $665,000 project. Now, when we look at how can the NAWS support the First Nation, we look at under NAWS, we can provide up to 60% of the total project, of the total renovations. So in this case, renovations cost $100,000. The NAWS can provide $60,000. So we need $40,000 to be made up by the First Nation. For new construction, NAWS pays up to 20% of the cost of the homes. So in this case, it would provide $80,000 towards the new homes. Mold renovations, NAWS provides 90%. So for 4 mold renovations that cost $100,000, NAWS would provide $90,000 of that funding. To prepare a lot, it's going to cost you $15,000 per quote. However, the NAWS does allow up to $25,000. And project management, NAWS allows $50,000 over 3 years. So the total NAWS funding towards a project is $295,000. Now, if we just, I know this one is sometimes difficult to kind of grasp. So I'd just like to hold on this one for a minute and just go back to it and say, if we look at those renovations, possibly out of those 10 homes, you might need to put $5,000 into one home and $25,000 into another home. So we're no longer tied by that subsidy per door. We're looking at the total project cost. So that allows the First Nation more flexibility within those renovation programs to mix and match dollars. The same with 2 new homes. Total is a $400,000 project. You've got $80,000 to support that, depending on the band's policies or needs for those homes. You may want to put $10,000 towards one home and $70,000 towards another. So you can mix and match depending on what your needs are. And the same with the mold. So that's how we ask for them to be broken down in the applications. We're no longer looking at that subsidy per door. Stream 3 is really an add-on to try to support those bands who have a dire need for lots when we don't have capital budget to support any subdivisions over the past few years. So this is back to a flat rate calculation formula that we're applying. Now, we'll only be able to do 2 or 3 projects a year probably under this program, but it's to really help those bands who have a dire need for lots. And you'll see that that's our formula for an urban situated band. It's $28,000 per house plus $25,000 per lot. And we'll fund up to a total of 10 lots or 10 homes. Now, First Nation can certainly build 15 lots and 15 homes, but our max is 10. I'll just quickly run through a scenario on this one. First considerations, very similar to Stream 2. There's got to be financial viability to the application, to the project. And this is probably everything that we have under Stream 2, you need to have under Stream 3. And there just may be some additional technical requirements for lot development. So in this case, if we had a First Nation who's classified as rural, and let's say that you wanted to build 6 new lots and build 8 homes. Some of the projects we've seen have done that, where bands have built duplexes, and they don't need as many lots as they do homes. So just running through an example scenario, it costs $1.6 million to build the 8 units, 2 duplexes and 4 attached homes, and it costs $250,000 to develop 6 new lots. Here's how the funding would work under Stream 3. So under that rural classification, it's $34,000 per house, which equals $272,000. And so now the First Nation then has to find $1.3 million of loans, financing, and or equity. To develop the lots, cost $250,000, and INAC provides $240,000 towards that. So there's a $10,000 shortfall to develop the lots. And I just want to leave it there. Our questions for this: how do you apply? You can, number one, what we require is that all housing projects are included on the First Nation Infrastructure Investment Plan, the FNIP, and your capital management officer is the lead contact. And we also have applications can be made to the housing subsidy program if the band is only in Stream 1. If the band is already approved for Stream 2 or Stream 3, then we're saying, well, you can't come back to the existing housing subsidy program as well. We were going to ask a question through here.
Yeah, so why don't
we're
going to go, after both presentations, we'll open things up for broader questions, but we just have a quick poll question that we'll ask here, which is to see which, for First Nations anyhow that are on the line, how many have developed housing policies. So I think that would be helpful to see where folks fit into the spectrum of the funding programs that Rick was talking about. So if you could just fill out the poll, I think it'd be useful information for everybody to see where folks are at. Okay. So you can see we've got a mix here, but quite a number of people have where this applies to have either finished a housing policy or they're in the middle of creating housing policy, and not too many have not even begun the process. So that's great to see. So I think at this point, Rick, unless there's anything else you wanted to say, we can switch things over to Lindsay and hear a little bit about the provincial programs. Does that make sense? For sure, yeah. Okay. And we can do questions and answers after that. Yeah. Okay. So just give us a moment here. Elena, can you do that? We'll move to our second presenter, Lindsay Wood. Lindsay is with the provincial government, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about the First Nations Clean Energy Business Fund. So.
Okay, so you can hear me all right there?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. So firstly, again, I'd like to say thank you to Fraser Basin Council for this invite to come and present here. I'm always looking for opportunities to talk about the Clean Energy Business Fund and spread the word about the fund. This is also an opportune time right now because we've just recently made some changes to the Clean Energy Business Fund, and I think they're really relevant to this discussion we're having today. So we'll talk about those a little later on, but on how the fund can support some of these types of projects. But I'm going to start right from the beginning. So Clean Energy Business Fund, it received its Royal Assent in June of 2010, and in the Clean Energy Act created the First Nations Clean Energy Business Fund. So it's a program that was created to facilitate increased First Nations participation in the clean energy sector. And I think it's really relevant, I should really point out that this is a program quite often in government, you see that programs generally have 3-year lifespans. But because this program was created under the Clean Energy Act, this program is no longer just 3 years. It's for the lifetime of the legislation. As long as this legislation is in place, we have this fund moving forward. So I think it's really key to point out that as much as it is a program, it's here for more than 3 years, and it has been so far. The Clean Energy Business Fund, originally it was provided with $5 million to kick it off, to start investing for First Nations to start investing in the clean energy sector. It was created as a self-sustaining envelope. So again, this is sort of where the legislation really supports this program, in that it has additional revenues that are flowing into the fund from independent power projects that are being developed from across the province. So through eligible projects, through their land tenures and their water licenses, soon to be wind royalties, there are revenues that are deposited directly into the fund to continue supporting capacity and equity applications that we'll talk about a little further. And again, to show that government is supportive of this program, they allocated an additional $1 million back in 2014 to keep this fund moving forward. So with the Clean Energy Business Fund, there's 3 streams of funding. We're going to focus on the first 2, but I will touch on, and I have already, on the revenue sharing side of it. So there's capacity funding, which is up to a maximum of $50,000 per community. We have equity funding, which is up to a maximum amount of $500,000 per community. I'll speak a little more to sort of funding allocations in just a couple of slides. And then there's the third stream of funding, which is revenue sharing. So those First Nations who have traditional territories that are overlapping independent power projects are eligible for revenue sharing. And with this revenue sharing, it can be allocated towards to however the community sees fit. So, if it's something to continue supporting some of the work that you folks are doing with housing or anything, it can be spent as the community wants. The Clean Energy Business Fund, it's application driven. So we review applications multiple times a year. They're reviewed by cross-agency reviews. So it's a panel that's made up of MAR, Energy and Mines, and Forest Lands folks. It's a competitive process, so we take the best applications that we see coming through. The application and guidelines are available on our website. They are in Excel format, but we generally will accept an application however you provide it. We're generally looking that you ensure that you include all of the information that we are asking for. But some folks, you may have an application that you've already created for some other type of funding that you just need to adapt to the Clean Energy Business Fund guidelines and the application process. So as long as you're including the information that we're asking for, we are happy to receive the application however you deliver it. To date, the fund has provided more than $6.9 million to support 116 Aboriginal renewable energy projects. 107 have been capacity and 9 have been equity. Some of the capacity agreements that we've supported to date, community energy planning. So by completing a community energy plan, you're looking at renewable energy as a whole and what opportunities might be there for your community. But you're also, in these community energy plans, you're looking at demand side management and energy efficiency and conservation for your community. So these plans might be useful in applying for other sources of funding, potentially some of the funding that Rick was just talking about, because you're already looking at your energy costs for your community buildings or your community residential housing and that sort of thing. So these documents or these applications and these plans would be probably used and accepted by a supporting document for some of that other funding that you've been looking at. Some of the other capacity type projects we've funded include feasibility studies for the development of renewable energies. Equity agreements or applications that we've approved in the past have included things like have included things like district energy systems for communities. So when a community is looking at, connecting community buildings, you might also be looking at district energy systems for housing, for residential housing as well to connect. So earlier on, I was talking about some of the ways that we've expanded our funding. So just over the last couple of months, we've updated our guidelines that are online, and we've expanded our capacity funding to support business plans to develop renewable energy project supply, or renewable energy companies that could be wholly owned by bands that, maybe you're creating your own company and you're doing energy efficiency installs for projects in your own community. Maybe you might branch out and be able to support another community in the development of their own projects as well, or installs. Capacity funding can also be applied for training, for solar insulation, draft proofing, ventilation, passive house training. So all these kinds of things that you might be doing within your own community, and you could use that knowledge and that training to support other communities, or just continuing installs in your own community. As well as we've updated the equity funding. So we've updated it for contributions to implement energy efficiency projects, small scale heat production, and it's up to a maximum amount of $150,000 for any one project. So again, if you're finding that some sort of like a district energy system or solar panels or whatever it might be that you're including in your community, this could be some opportunities as well. Generally we're not looking to fund specific one or two residential houses. We're looking for a bigger project that we'd be funding, because this is grant funding, and we would also be looking for additional funding we may have found from other sources as well. Some of the other projects, of course not limited to, implementing high energy efficiency heat technologies, talked about space and water heating, boiler replacements, heat recovery systems, on-site generation, DSM, so installation of small technologies. And then I'm just going to quickly sort of run over the revenue sharing. It's not totally applicable to this group, but I think it's worth understanding how it's a self-sustaining fund, and it's just that with revenue sharing arrangements, or revenue sharing with the fund, it's what's made it to self-sustaining envelope. So as projects are deemed eligible, 50% of the water and land rent the province receives are deposited into the fund. Of that, 75% is shared into revenue sharing, and then the other 20% comes back into continue funding projects for capacity and equity, and some projects like these ones that we're talking about today. That would add on to questions and answers if anybody's got any.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Lindsay. That's a great overview, and as you can see, lots of potential for complementing what Rick was talking about earlier with this other funding program. So these aren't the only two sources of potential funding for energy efficiency work in First Nations housing, but two, I think, great examples of, especially with the updates that Lindsay has talked about. Before we go into the Q&A, I see some people already typed them in. We have a quick poll for you to see if your community has created a community energy plan. So we'd like to hear from you about this topic as well. Okay, so here are the results. So not too many of you have a completed plan, but looks like a number are in the middle of creating plans, and there are also a number that have not yet begun. So potentially an opportunity here to build on the great work that seems to be happening around housing policy to also incorporate community energy use. So at this point in time, we will switch gears a little bit here to maybe I'll just put up this slide here for a moment. Where are we at? Just give me one moment here to lose our. Sorry, folks. And what we'll do now is we will. We have some time for questions. I can see that. I can see that we have some people who've already begun to ask some questions. So the first one here was from Arif is, Rick, if you could just please repeat how much is available for energy efficiency type projects in both urban and remote.
Yeah.
Is there a difference there?
Well, there is a difference in, so if we're talking about that Stream 2 funding, I assume that's what Arif is talking about, that the eligible amount of funding for that First Nation is based on the existing housing subsidy program. So the First Nation would have to look at what is their current subsidy that they're eligible for. If it's an urban band, it would be around $20,000, ranging all the way up to, if it's a remote band, it'd be $40,000. So what we do is we times that by 10. So in this case, if it's a remote band, it would be, the band is eligible for up to $400,000 under Stream 2. Now this is where it's up to the band. Energy efficiency is just included as a renovation. We look at that as it's part of the band's plan or plan for their project. So they can slice and dice that however they feel they need. And for instance, if we went back to that scenario that I was presenting, if the band had 10 renovations and they were all energy efficiency renovations that totaled $100,000, then they'd be eligible for $60,000. So it really depends on what the band's project, the scope of the project, and what types of activities they want to do under that project. So we don't have it specifically identified for energy efficiency. I just will add, and I know there's a number of consultants on the webcast here, but we really want to make sure that it's the First Nation who's driving the consultant, not the consultant driving the First Nation, and that is First Nations have to be proactive in determining where they want to go, what they want to see done, and then use the consultants to bring that plan to reality.
Okay, and as I mentioned before, if someone does want to ask their question over the phone, feel free to type that into the question box as well, and we can unmute you. Another question here from Jillian. Does a band need to have completed a community energy plan to be eligible for Stream 1 funding? And I think this is actually referring to your program, Rick.
Right. No, it doesn't. It can use Stream 1 funding to develop a plan. And I think, especially listening to Lindsay's presentation, there's great opportunity to leverage resources so that the band can not only develop a good energy plan, but also have that incorporated into the housing plan as well.
Yeah, great.
Again, that's kind of what I was sort of suggesting with that is because, we'll do sort of that higher level and then they can look closer to what they want to pursue, and your funding, Rick, would be something that they could pursue to support some of those costs going forward. Plus, they'd have really strong documentation behind them that has the community support and the community engagement that's happened to date.
For sure.
Okay. Just a brief question here about the PowerPoints someone had. If they could be emailed, they'll be available on our website within about a week or so. as well as a recording of the webinar. So if you want to come back to it then, we'll send out that link to you. Now, it's a question here from Katie. I think this probably is in reference to your program, Lindsay, if I understand it. It says, is the $150,000 in addition to the 500K maximum for equity funding, or is it part of that? So if
it's part of that. So it is a maximum amount of $500,000 per community. And inside that cap, we do up to $150,000 per project for demand side projects.
Okay, thanks.
So they could, and just to further on it, actually, the community could come back to the fund afterwards and look if they've got a new project that they're looking to do some work on, or construct or build something different. They could always come back for that remaining $350 that would be allocated as a max amount to any one community.
Okay, thank you.
Does that
I think that answers the question, yeah. Another question for Rick from Ken. Where do First Nations find the in-kind or cash that they need for your program? And I guess can other, sounds like other federal programs be used for that? If I understand it, there's a bit of a typo there maybe. But
yeah, well, I think if we're talking Stream 1 where we specifically mentioned in-kind, that would be a situation where, number one, respecting what First Nations told us, they told us unanimously that the band has to have equity in the game, or else it won't work. So trying to respect those guidelines, we do require that the band has to come in with equity, and it can be cash, or the in-kind can be, we've seen in-kind being outlined as hall rental, catering, some of the band staff wages, things like that. Maybe Ken, if that doesn't answer your question, Ken, I would say pop us another question, or you can get in touch with me after the session. Pop me an email. I hope that answered it though.
Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to move to the first question that anyone's asked. If you'd asked a second question, we'll come back to you as we have time here, just to make sure everyone has a chance to ask at least one question. Next question is from Rochelle, which is, how does the INAC Stream 2 funding affect block-funded bands?
Yeah, it's a good question. All bands are eligible. It's the block-funded bands must still follow the guidelines. It's called Access to Additional Capital for Block-Funded Bands guidelines. Basically, what it says is that the band has to demonstrate that it's already committed 80% of its block funding in order to be eligible for additional capital funding. And follow up with the capital management officer on your specific situation.
Okay. There's a question from Dave here, which is for First Nations Clean Energy Business Fund equity sharing. Can you advise if First Nation also shares 50% of mineral rights of lands?
Sorry, I guess I don't understand the question.
Mineral rights? Assuming that relates to the revenues that the fund is, as I understand it, is partially funded out of revenues from water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no similar program related to mineral rights.
No.
Okay.
And if I'm not answering that question fully, feel free to contact me directly, and I can chat further. Okay,
that sounds good. And so I think Lindsay's contact information might have been at the end of her presentation. If you missed it, feel free to contact Elena or I, and we can put you in touch with any of the speakers where you've got a question that hasn't been answered. I think I've covered everyone's first question for the moment. So let's, I'll do my best here, and hopefully we don't miss anybody on second questions. Jillian had another question, which is, could FBC or other agencies put together a list of experienced, reputable contractors who would be able to support BC nations in completing energy upgrades to homes? That's a great question, and I know it's an issue for communities that we work with in finding those folks that they trust and are going to do a good job, quality work. Definitely challenging. We have to maybe think about that, about how that might be able to work, and whether we're the right group to do that. But I think you're onto something there, which is being able to help folks navigate this, and I think as well, even just beginning with the planning stage, being able to find suitable outside help if needed to help with planning the energy efficiency upgrades is a key part. Often the actual construction may be a mix of in-house capacity and maintenance staff, or even in some cases construction companies. So they're, certainly for each community they have a different approach to that, and so to do that comprehensively for BC would be a big job. But thanks for the suggestion. That's a very pertinent topic. Another question from Katie, which is, has the province committed to yearly funding for the First Nations Clean Energy Business Fund, or will revenues still primarily come from land and water licenses?
At this point in time, land and water, the rents that the province receives is what's sustaining the fund.
Okay.
Yeah. But there was the initial, there was that additional $1 million that was provided to the fund. And that was just because projects hadn't really reached their commercial operation date. So there were less than expected revenues for that time. So they saw the need and they provided that. But on the go forward, the fund has multiple intakes every year. So we're moving forward with just the revenues that it's receiving from projects.
Okay. So Ken, another question for you, Lindsay, is there a requirement for matching either in kind or cash for your program?
I can go ahead and I'll answer. Again, when we're reviewing applications, they're reviewed on a competitive process. So we're looking for those. We're looking for that in-kind or cash contributions into the applications. It's something that could potentially move an application further ahead. And again, it's really, for those same reasons, same things that Rick was describing earlier. We really want to see that that the community and Chief and Council are very supportive of this project going forward. That there's a project champion for this project. Someone who will be there for the duration as well, right? So it's about really knowing that the band is behind this investment.
Okay. The next is just a comment, I think, from Ken, which is remote communities face much higher costs, material transport, construction crew accommodation, and crew transport, which very, very true.
I'll just quickly make
sure. You want to make a comment on that, Ken?
Yeah, just because it does come up often, and I think that's where the reason why we use the existing housing subsidy formula for calculating our maximum funding under Stream 2, and the formula is under Stream 3, just to allow, for instance, a remote band is going to be eligible for more money than an urban band for that reason.
Right.
And if I could add, even to, I know that it was question was directed to Rick, but with the opportunities under the capacity funding now for the Clean Energy Business Fund, there's some opportunities for some training. So, maybe in some of the communities you're looking at training members to be able to implement energy efficiency type projects into community housing and residential housing. So maybe it's an opportunity to not only build something for your own members, but for supporting other bands and reducing some of those costs if they're within the same region or something like that.
And there was a question in here around if other funding programs can be used as the sort of First Nations contribution. I think we sort of already covered that in that. That's kind of the perfect opportunity if you're able to access more than one funding program to be able to use another funding source as the potential in-kind or cash contribution. Is that?
Well, we still need the First Nations contribution.
They need to contribute in it, even if there was provincial funding. There would have to be some sort of in-kind or small cash.
And cash, yeah, depending on the project, yeah.
Okay. Question here around, are funds available to prepare a new lot for a commercial lease? Is that part of your program?
This is strictly residential, community housing.
Okay. Someone here has a question around, or maybe more a comment, that their community would be interested in solar energy, and could they get more info? So maybe perhaps what we'll do is just follow up on that offline. Another question from Arif is, if bands were able to borrow funds from financial institutions, would both the province and INAC accept these as the band's contribution? Is that part of the formula? I mean, I'm sure many of the new homes are financed. So is that part of the formula or not?
That's the band's commitment. So,
yeah.
I think it's a tough question to answer yes or no. It depends on the situation, but obviously if it's the band's contribution, that's...
Yeah. Okay, there is someone on the line here who is studying clean energy at UBC, and her question is directed to First Nations participants, which is she's working on her final master's project, and is there a community that's interested in exploring a project to create a community energy plan? So I guess what I'd suggest is maybe we can send an email to Elena if there's interest in that. And we can connect you together if there's interest there. It's great. We've got lots of questions here, so I appreciate all the interest. I want to make sure I don't miss anyone. Another question from Arif is, do Rick or Lindsay have any thoughts on consultants taking a financial risk in achieving forecasted energy savings? Should this be built into energy efficiency funding? So maybe I'm just trying to make sure I understand the question, Arif, but that would be more or less kind of a sort of a financing mechanism where the consultant would guarantee a certain energy savings and potentially invest in the project, I suppose. So that might be one for an offline conversation, perhaps. If it's a little more complex, we could certainly maybe something to follow up on.
Sorry, I can't say I have any thoughts on it right now, Reef.
Sounds innovative. Question from Trent is are there funded events in BC where bands should be at for new ideas, best practices, and most important, networking? I guess around this topic, Trent. Well, I mean, we do have I guess, be a good time to say something about this. We are planning a workshop in the Vancouver area at Musqueam in January. For First Nations that are interested or developing energy efficient housing policies or developing projects on January 26th. And so for those of you from First Nations that are on the line, we can certainly extend the invitation to some of you. But if you're interested, please get in touch with Elena, and we can provide some further details. We do have a limited space and funding, but we're wanting to include anybody who's got a real keen interest. So yes, and we hope that you can make it, Trent. Just a follow up here, I think from Ken around the in-kind and matching is that, so, essentially, I guess that the bands need their own source revenues to be able to invest somehow in these projects. Is that or I guess financing, which was mentioned earlier.
That's right.
The loans, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Or it's, that's it, finding the equity. That's why we've got that in-kind potential for the streamline as well.
Yeah. Okay. Arif, you had something here about speaking. Would you like to speak? We could unmute you if there was something you needed to expand on here. Just trying to see. Okay. Just give me one moment here. Okay, you should be unmuted, Arif. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question really is that, we have, the challenge we have with energy efficiency is it's easy to say we're going to do energy efficiency. People are putting good money and effort, community money, governments are putting money in. I just feel that there is probably time we should think about people delivering on what they promise they'll deliver. Rather than saying, oh, we'll run a program, we'll do X, Y, and Z. At the end of the day, the proof of the pudding is making sure that what is put out to happen will be delivered. I mean, we wouldn't dream of funding a clean energy project and not being sure of the output, but we seem to be okay in funding energy efficiency projects when we're not totally clear of the output. That's really my point. Because we can waste a lot of money.
I understand. Yeah. So in a way, it's how does the community make sure that they get what they're being promised out of it? And one potential mechanism is to hold the consultants' feet to the fire, or to have them kind of sharing in the either losses or gains that are achieved on energy efficiency relative to the target they've been promised.
Yeah, lots of mechanisms. What I'm saying is that the funding, in my view, should be tied to people achieving results. And that should include consultants.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just trying to get the words out. That makes me think, Arif, of overall project management, and maybe that's something that would really help First Nations networking and sharing best practices on the contracts with the contractor. Holdbacks and these types of things too. So certainly a big topic, but I think it's a good point.
Yeah, but I just think it's something that maybe the province and the federal government should be thinking about as they fund this stuff. Because as Julian said, there isn't a list of approved consultants, and there's many of us around and all that sort of stuff. So but if you had a built-in mechanism where people were responsible and that you would only fund that if that happened. I mean, after all, that's what happens with building inspections, right? So I think it's another way of saying, you said you're going to put the roof on. Well, did you put the roof on? I'll come and check. So it's just a very simplistic, rather than simplistic view that people should deliver what they set out to deliver.
Yeah, great point, Arif. Let's see what else we have here for questions. We had a few people that have interest in being contacted by Bree, the student, so we'll make sure that gets passed on. There's a question here about how applications are reviewed to ensure the technical rigor behind demand-side management and clean energy projects to make sure it's a good investment for the community, keeping in mind the earlier comment about the difficulty of finding good contractors. I don't know, Lindsay, do you have anything to add to that question?
Like I said, I mean, we've got a cross-agency panel that reviews the applications, and with the combination of everybody's expertise at the table, we hope that we're funding the right projects going forward. And quite often we'll look at the companies that they might be using, and if they've got them listed in their applications, that's something that we always do look for. We look for even consultant resumes, and that sort of thing is included in a lot of applications, just to understand the type of work that that those folks have also been involved in, and hopefully, you know, like somebody within our group has some experience with working with them, or we've seen past success from those projects, or from those consultants, or those folks doing those projects.
Just one more question, maybe. I know we're a minute past 12 here, so we'll need to wrap things up shortly. But a question from Ken is, are there specific targets for energy efficiency renovations? In other words, do the projects have to achieve a certain energy savings to be considered? I don't know if that's for either program, whether there's anything there you could speak to.
Well, from the INAC perspective, we don't have. I think it's a great question, a great topic, and however, we don't have any specific targets as of yet, anyways.
No, Lindsay?
And for the equity investments from the Clean Energy Business Fund, we're looking at those right now at specifically at what those targets should be at.
Okay. Is that something that will be available through the review process?
Yeah, it'll be something that is available in the review process. We've just launched the new funding category, so we are in the process. We just don't want to be missed in the next intake, which closes at the end of January. So we wanted to make sure it was out there, and communities were aware of the new funding option. And we are working on that, at what our expectation is, or what the expectation will be for energy efficiency.
Okay. And so likely there won't be any information before the next intake, but there may be after that point in time, perhaps?
Yeah, but I am hoping to have something there, something available. I'm hoping to have something available for the new year.
Okay.
Before the intake.
Okay. Is that so?
I haven't at this point received too many questions and too many inquiries about the new funding stream. Generally, as everybody knows, I mean, as the closing date comes sooner, I'll be receiving many more questions, and it's something that's on my top of my to-do list to be working on. So. Okay.
Well, something for people to, hopefully you'll get lots of inquiries after this webinar, but perhaps something to keep in touch with you on. And if you do have anything to share, let us know, Lindsay, and we can certainly share it with this group, as there may be people who are considering it, and it would be helpful to make sure they have the guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I'll do that.
That sounds great. Well, I think at this point we'll wrap things up for this webinar. We're trying to do this about every month, so we don't have next month's planned yet, but we'll let you know once we've got that set. But just wanted to thank both of our speakers, Lindsay Wood and Rick Sabiston, for your great information, and also for everyone who's participated for all your questions. And I think at this point in time, maybe we'll just wrap things up and thank everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.